Everybody, if you could come on in and take a seat. I'm going to be up here this morning because they're doing some fixes on the microphones and stuff. I appreciate all that Josh is doing, updating our technology, getting us into the 21st century. Really appreciate that, and I know that everyone who hears us online will appreciate that too because they'll be able to hear us. So with that, we're going to ask Vern to lead us in a word of opening prayer, and then we're going to jump into Revelation chapter 13.
Would you all bow with me, please? Dear Heavenly Father, so high, thank you so much for this time that we can be here at this church building together to hear your word and to learn everything that you want us to know. Please fill us with your Holy Spirit and allow us to understand your message for each one of us today. Please be with Mitchell as he brings this lesson to us. We're so appreciative of all the work he does, and we're so thankful that all of us could be here today. Please, we say all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
I don't know if I said it or not, but all these opening shots are from the island of Patmos, where John wrote the book of Revelation. Okay, so the same slide I show every week. This book was meant to be understood. It says it's prophesying about things that are about to take place, but it's 2,000 years have gone by, and we don't all understand what he's talking about sometimes. So there's some room for disagreement here, and I certainly don't have all the answers. So if we disagree, that's okay. So we are in the middle. We're in chapter 13, and we're talking about the 7 signs in heaven this morning. Last week, I said, read Daniel chapter 7. Read Daniel chapter 7 because there's a lot of imagery that we're going to see again in chapter 13. And we talked about the beast that comes from the sea, and we noted how that the beast from the sea lines up with the fourth beast from Daniel chapter 7, and that a lot of the things in Revelation are a composite of that fourth beast and all the beasts that he consumed. And we showed that the fourth beast in Revelation is pointing to the Roman Empire. And that's not very controversial. What is controversial is some people say, well, no, it's not talking about the Roman Empire in Revelation chapter 13, but yeah, it is. And then I lined up, we talked about that the beast works for the devil and the Roman Empire killed Jesus. And we went through all these things, and I put this down because sometimes the only way you can figure out is to kind of line up the different attributes and kind of make your best estimation of what he's talking about. And then we started talking about the second beast, the land beast, the wolf in sheep's clothing, as it was. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke as the dragon. And later on, we're going to find out that the second beast is called the false prophet. Okay. And then it said, here is wisdom. Let he who understands calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So what does that mean? You can figure out who the beast is by calculating his name from his number. And the man and the beast number is 666. So we started talking about that a little bit last week, and we're going to continue that today. Okay, so a lot of people say that the wolf in sheep's clothing, the false prophet, is the Pope. And I said, well, a lot of people say that because Protestants don't like the Pope. But in actuality, why would you tell the churches in Asia about some guy who's going to be ruling in Italy when, and I showed maps, the 7 churches of Asia have never been under the papacy in Rome. There's never been a pope in Rome telling the people in the 7 churches of Asia what to do. It's just all throughout history, there's been a big divide there, and they don't actually get along all that well. And in 1054, the guy who was running the Eastern churches actually excommunicated the Pope, and the Pope excommunicated him. So I'm like, I just don't see it being the Pope. The Pope is definitely a false prophet, and he obviously does a lot of stuff that's contrary to God's will, but I'm having a hard time thinking that the false prophet is the Pope. So then we said, well, who else might it be? Well, it sounds like that the false prophet must be someone who claims to be either Christian or a Jew, because they're a false prophet. They got to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. You got to be like a Christian and say, I'm a Christian, but then do things for the Roman Empire, for the bad guy. So it sounds like somebody who works for the Romans, but says they're a Christian or says they're a Jew. One of the possible candidates is Herod Agrippa, guy in Acts chapter 25 that sees Paul in prison. He's going to tell the Jewish people, don't rebel against the Romans. It's going to be all right. Don't rebel. And then when they did rebel, he supported the Romans against the church in Jerusalem. So some people say this guy, Herod Agrippa, he's the false prophet. Other people say, no. Maybe if you believe that the book of Revelation is talking about persecution by Domitian in the late 1st century against the churches in the Asia region, then you might say, well, maybe he was a Christian who was actually working for the Romans, or a Roman official who was said he became a Christian so he would figure out who all the Christians were so he could turn them in. And other people say, no. The false prophet is like the emperor of Rome, and the beast is the Rome itself. And I'm like, well, shouldn't they be different? So there's a lot of ideas about who this false prophet is. Okay. Then we moved on to the mark of the beast last week. And I wanted to bring up a couple of slides that I showed that when we're talking about in the 144,000 were sealed, back in Ezekiel, the saints were sealed, not saints, but believers were sealed so that they wouldn't be destroyed in the destruction of Jerusalem back in 586. And we said, this is a symbol. It's not like there's a real seal that they all got stamped with, and it's like, that person doesn't get killed because they got the stamp on their forehead. It was a symbolic kind of thing. And we say, well, we're confused about this because this imagery doesn't work for us. And I'm like, well, yeah, it really does. Because we and our soldiers, even today, we put the seal of the United States, that's the seal there on the center of their hat, the seal on their uniforms. So you could say that these guys have the seal of the United States on their forehead. And it's like, so it's not imagery that, we don't think about it a lot, but it's actually imagery that we see today. So other people might say, well, the seal, the mark of the beast, is on the helmet of the Roman soldiers or something. Lots of different ideas about that. Okay, and we talked about these scriptures before about where it's talking about sealed. We're sealed in Christ Jesus, but we don't actually have like a stamp on our forehead. My opinion is that the mark of the beast is not like a tattoo on your forehead. Some people disagree, and they're actually waiting for people to start getting stamped on their forehead or their right hand. But what it sounds like more is that it's something to do with, it talks about buying and selling. So let's talk about that. So option number one that floats around out there is that there were these marketplaces, these open-air marketplaces, and they called it the agora, the open-air market. And some say, well, when you came up to that market, there would be people standing out front, and they'd say, well, you need to, before you come into the market, you need to do a sacrifice. And you would do a little sacrifice or burn some incense, and then they'd put some of the soot on your forehead. This sounds really compelling, but I can't find any sources, first-hand, first-century sources, who document this. So I don't know. But this is an idea that's out there that some people say that they had, the mark of the beast was a little bit of soot on their forehead. It's out there. I thought you should be aware. The second one we talked about was that during the reign of Domitian, Domitian was an awful guy, and he persecuted Christians a lot. And when he persecuted Christians, there were people who brought forth and accused of being a Christian, and they'd say, if you curse God and do a sacrifice to the emperor, we'll let you off the hook. But if you don't, we're going to execute you. So if you pass this test, they would give you a piece of paper or a piece of parchment that said, so-and-so has sacrificed to the emperor and is able to do business. And that way, that would be like you've been cleared. You were accused of this, and now you've been cleared because you got your little piece of paper, so now you can do business. So this is an idea, and it's actually well documented in history because they've found the little pieces of paper. And we read a little bit of this last week where Pliny the Younger, who was a Roman governor, talked about people being accused of being accused of being a Christian, and that he would interrogate them. And again, if they would worship the emperor, then he would let them off the hook. And he sent these letters to the emperor saying, well, a lot of people are getting accused, anonymous accusations. And the emperor wrote back and said, no. If somebody's accused, anonymous accusations have no place in our empire, because just anybody who doesn't like somebody could just accuse you of being a Christian, and then you get executed. So keep going about what you're doing, which is ask them, and if they say no, they're not a Christian, well, good. But if they won't deny Christ, well, then execute them, of course. So these letters, 1,800 years ago, are still preserved, and we have this correspondence between the Emperor Trajan and Pliny. Okay, so now we get to the third. Let me go back. So is there any questions about those options? We discussed that mostly last week, but I want to open it up. Are there questions about what we've said so far in our review? Okay, well, let's go to option number 3. Option number 3, okay. If you turn over to John chapter 2 and you go look, Jesus comes into the temple. And Jesus, I'll just go ahead and read this. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house into a place of business. So you're like, what are you talking about? Why are you talking about this verse? Okay. So the Romans were in charge of Judea during the first century. So when you're in charge, what do? You mint money, right? You make coins. You make the currency. Roman currency has the emperor's face on it. But if you go look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, it says, so watch yourself carefully, and then down in verse 16, so that you do not act corruptly and make a graven image for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of a male or a female. So if you're a good Jew, would it be okay for you to have a coin with the emperor's face on it? What do you think? You're all like, I hadn't thought about this one before. Yeah, Roger.
Well, it had to be okay for him because Jesus was being questioned, says, well, take out a coin whose face is on it. So they were using that money.
They were definitely using the money, whether it was okay or not, but they were using the money, yes. So the Romans allowed the Herodian dynasty. So remember, these Herod guys I talked about a minute ago, they were in charge of Judea when the Romans took over. And the Romans didn't invade Judea as it was when they took over in like 60-ish, 70-ish BC. It was kind of like they just annexed the territory and took over, and the Herods were in charge, and they were pseudo-Jews. What do I mean by pseudo-Jews? Well, Herod was raised in Rome, but of Jewish ancestry. So they propped these Herodians up as the leaders, the governor or the king of these areas, and they allowed the Herodian dynasty to mint coins that didn't have the face of the emperor on it. Okay, so here's where we get to the money changers. So when you came up to the temple with your Roman coin with the face of the emperor on it, they'd say, oh, well, you can't use that to pay the temple tax. You can't pay that to pay for the temple. So the money changers, they had all this Jewish money. They had all this Herodian money that didn't have the face of the emperor on it. And guess what? They would sell you these Jewish coins to do your contribution. And they made a cut. So here's how it works. People come to the temple. They say, all we have is these Roman denariuses, so you go to the money changers, and for a fee, they sell you this Jewish coinage that doesn't have the emperor's face on it. And you go pay your alms. So now these priests have all this Jewish money, right? So what do? They sell it for Roman money, back to the money changers, and they take a cut. It's a scam. It was this big scam, and Jesus knew it. Everybody knew it. These money changers were taking a cut. Of course, a money changer. Why would the money changer sit there and change money if he wasn't making a cut? Have y'all ever bought money at like a border or something? You know, used to before we all used credit cards. You went to the border and they took a 10% cut to give you Canadian money or money from Europe or wherever. You ever do that? You're like, this is a scam. I'm just getting ripped, right? Well, that's what was happening. Okay, so here's some pictures of that money. So on the left over here, on the right over here, you have the Roman coinage, and I just picked two random ones from across that first century. Claudius reigned in like the 40s, and Vespasian reigned in the 80s, and you can find coins. All of the emperors have coins with their face on it. But on the other side, the Jewish money minted by the Herodian dynasty and even by the Jewish rebels, doesn't have a symbol on it that is prohibited. No faces, no animals. Interesting. Now, have y'all heard this before? Is this new, or have you, some of you, it's okay, you're not on camera, you can raise your hand. Yeah, I've heard this. Or, nope, I haven't heard this. Wow, okay, so a couple of folks have heard it, yeah. Okay, so this theory is that the mark of the beast represents the Roman coinage, because you can't buy or sell without money, right? That's right, we all get that. So the theory is that the mark of the beast is this Roman money. So there's going to be a time where there's no more Jewish money that doesn't have the face of the emperor on it. So this is a theory that people who believe that this is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, or even Roman persecution in the first century. The mark of the beast is Roman money because it all has the emperor's face on it. So that's the theory. I actually like this one. I like this theory a lot. And when we get to chapter 17, it's going to become apparent why I like it so much. But this is one of the theories about what the mark of the beast is. The mark of the beast is the Roman currency. Now, you'll find that we talked about it. It's not Bitcoin. It's not your credit card. But all of these kind of ideas stem from the idea that it's talking about buying and selling. You have to have the mark of the beast in order to buy and sell. So that's the theory. Okay, it could be something completely different. And I am not going to be dogmatic about this because I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but it must be something that the audiences that the book was written to, the 7 churches in Asia, would have understood. So that's about all I'm going to say on that. Comments, questions, other ideas? Okay, cool. Okay, so now let's talk about 666. And I'm going to say 666, but the mark of the beast is not 666. It's 666. It's a numerical value. His number represents a man, and his number is 666. Now, I wrote it out there because in some old manuscripts of the Bible, it's written out 666. And in other manuscripts, it's just the letters that equate to 666. Okay. What is this up here? Come on. Audience participation. What's next to the word New York? Roman numerals. What's this? What does this say? Quick math. Y'all can figure it out. Somebody want to offer a guess? Do the math on their hands? 1982. There you go. That's right. 1982. AD. In the year of our Lord, 1982, whatever this was put together. Okay. This one, I figured all the guys would know. What Super Bowl was this? No. Nope. It was Super Bowl XLIV. I had to pick one that had lots of letters in it. It's 44. Okay, and the Saints beat the Colts 31-17. Okay, so how did I get this? I have a purpose, I promise. So X equals 10, L equals 50, I equals 1, and V equals 5. And the way you do the math is that the first number is smaller than the second, then you subtract the smaller from the greater. So it's minus 10 plus 50 minus 1 plus 5 gets 44. And that's how Dave knew that last one said 1982. Okay, what is this? And what I'm doing is I'm showing you that you guys have already seen this before. This isn't a foreign language to you. Well, it is a foreign language, but it's something you've seen before. This is called gematria. I think I'm saying that right. So this is something that we still use today, and we do our Super Bowls this way, and we put it on buildings and stuff. But what it is it's using letters to represent numbers. And in 800 BC, a guy used this. It's the oldest example that we know of, and it's been used throughout history, where letters represented numbers. Okay, so if you were to calculate the mark of the beast equals 666, you got to figure out what letters add up to 666. But when you do, you'll know that that's the mark of the beast. Does it make sense? That's the obvious problem. There are lots of combinations of letters and names that add up to 666. The other complication is you got to know what each letter stands for. Is A1, B2, C3? Or is A100, C50? You got to know all of this, right? So the ones we showed with Roman numerals is Latin gematria. I'm going to say that word wrong 50 different times. But what formula are we supposed to do? And y'all are all scratching your heads. Guess what? You're in good company. People have been scratching their heads to figure out who the mark of the beast is for 1,800 years at least. Okay, this guy, I love this guy. I'm going to call him Irenaeus. He might have gone by Irenaeus, but I just want y'all to know I don't speak Latin. He was a bishop. He was an elder in the church in Lyon, France. So he's like on the other side of the empire from the 7 churches of Asia. He's on the other side of the Alps. And he's got his copy of the book of Revelation. He doesn't know what it means either. And he wrote 5 books called Against Heresies, which is he's fighting against all the things he believes are false doctrine. And he talks about this and he says, I don't know what it is either. He says, the word Avanthus adds up to 666, but I don't know what that would mean. He says the word Latinos, which is Latin, adds up to 666. And he says, this one makes sense because the Latins are in charge right now, because he was part of the Roman Empire. And he says, and the other one is Titan. And he says, there's a myriad of numbers that names that add up to 666. And he didn't know what it was. And he wrote that in about 180 AD. So he goes on, and I think in one of the slides I have a website where you can go read all his stuff. He didn't know what it meant either. Okay, so let's talk about some of the popular opinions, and you've probably heard some of these. One popular opinion is Nero. Nero, written in Greek, translated into Hebrew, and decoded using Hebrew gematria, equals 666. Now, I don't know how easy that would have been to figure out that you were supposed to take this Latin guy's name, write it in Greek, and then switch it into Hebrew. But this is a theory that a lot of people go for, that it's Nero. Latin name, translated or edited into Greek using Hebrew gematria. Okay. Got a lot of blank stares. Another popular opinion is Domitian. Now, Domitian, if you believe that the book of Revelation is talking about a persecution of Asia Christians in the late 1st century, a lot of people say that Domitian would be the guy he's talking about. He was super cruel, and some people say, and again, I can't find 1st century sources that say this, but they called him a beast. And they said if you write out his name, Autocrator Kaiser Domitian Sebastios Germanicus, if you abbreviated it, that's what it would be, and then that equals 666. And I'm hoping you guys are seeing that this is not like an easy, this is like mental calisthenics or mental calculus to get these guys to equal 666. But this is stuff that's out there. People say it's this guy. Now, it would be awesome if you found a coin that had that inscription on it, because then you'd be like, see, right there, 666. Well, we hadn't found any coin that's got that on there. So that theory, it's a really good one, but there's not evidence to support the theory. Now, you say, well, let's write that one off completely. Well, the thing is that Domitian was hated so much that after he died, there was an active campaign to erase him from history. Like, I hope you can see there that they have chiseled away his name. They've chiseled away Domitian's name from this monument. They tried to eliminate him. So if these coins did exist, there's a plausible reason why they might have got melted down into other currency. Again, this is a theory that's out there about who 666 is. Questions about either of these two guys? Oh man, no questions this morning. Okay, another popular opinion, the Antichrist. So this is one that's out there a lot. And if you were reading quickly on the slide that talked about Irenaeus or Irenaeus, you'll see that he thought that the mark of the beast was ascribed to an Antichrist. A lot of people point to the beast or the false prophet or the land beast, however you want to call him, and call him the Antichrist. The Antichrist is a term applied to anyone who denies the Father and the Son. And we looked at the 2 John. There's 4 places where that term Antichrist is used, and it's all in 2 John. But again, 2 John was written by the same guys who wrote Revelation. But they make it into a title. When it says there are Antichrists that are now here, they say it's the Antichrist. And when you hear somebody put the in the front of it, it makes it sound like a title instead of a name or an attribute. We could definitely say that a false prophet is an Antichrist. So you could say that the person running this denomination or that denomination, or people have called Muhammad the Antichrist. Lots of different things are the Antichrist, right? But when you say the Antichrist, whoa. So they often link him also to the man of lawlessness. And Brad pointed this out to me last week, and I wanted to spend some time on it because he made a good point. Okay. So if you go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're not going to have time to read all through this, but there is a man of lawlessness that will be revealed. And if you read his attributes, a lot of his attributes are the same as the attributes of an Antichrist, because they're the attributes of somebody who denies Christ. The false prophet is someone who denies Christ, right? So what folks have done is they've taken this and they've wrapped it all together to make it a title. The Antichrist. But there's lots of people out there who are Antichrists. So we have to be careful. I think that's what this slide are the 4 verses in the New Testament that call someone an Antichrist. And you can say, who is a liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. So a lot of people look to this, though, and they say it's a title. It's the Antichrist, and we're looking for the Antichrist, the boogeyman, the guy who's going to come and be this false prophet. And they look to the future to find this, and it's always just about to happen. Throughout the last 2,000 years, where people have been writing about this guy, he's just about to happen. And they say, look, all of the signs are there because there's these bad people doing these bad things. But there's always bad people doing bad things, right? In the 40s, Hitler was the Antichrist. Everybody knew it. The second coming was about to happen because Hitler was the Antichrist. You can go throughout history and you'll find people do that. So, we got to be cautious about this because people roll all this stuff together. They roll it together with some Daniel chapter 7 and some Matthew 24 and a little bit of Mark and some 2 Thessalonians, and they make this whole thing, and they call it, and they talk about the rapture and the Armageddon and the war, and they pull these different verses and get these words that we don't know what they mean, like Armageddon. Like, who here knows what Armageddon means? We'll get there in a couple of weeks. Do y'all know what Armageddon means? Valley of Megiddo. It's just a place, right? We'll talk about it. But we use these terms, and so we can make a story around them. We can grab a verse here and grab a verse there, or we can put them in the order we want to make a story. So we have to be careful about that. Questions or comments about this? Yeah, Brad.
And they publish a lot of books and make bestsellers out of them.
They do. Kirk Cameron, the Left Behind series. I hear they remade that because Kirk Cameron's no longer a teenage heartthrob, so they remade those movies. The whole idea of this whole... So if we have time at the end of our Revelation study, we're going to talk about some of these doctrines that are not biblical, that are based upon some of these verses pulled out of context. So I'm going to save more of that maybe to the end. Hopefully, when we get into overtime on the book of Revelation, we can spend a little bit of time on this. But I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of people out there that think that this false prophet is the Antichrist, and he's this big bad boogeyman who's going to come, and as soon as he shows up, we'll all know who he is because he'll have the mark of the beast. Yeah. Okay. So other candidates. Y'all need to make some comments or we're going to be... Yes, Lance. So let's go back there. So the idea is that if you take this abbreviation of his title, it adds up to 666. And I'm not sure, that's probably, those look like Greek letters, so that's probably Greek gematria, but it could be Roman for all, no, it's Greek. So that's where they come up with that. Yeah, we're going to get to more people who can be that. Okay, other candidates. So there's a website out there where you can type in your name and they'll give you the formula so that you can be 666. Because if you don't know the decoder ring for what gematria system to use, you can make this into whoever you want. And, I put a lot of people that you've heard of, but you're like, who's Frederick II? Well, he was a pope. And they said, well, he's the Antichrist. Ronald Reagan, because all three of his names had 6 letters, that's all it took to be 666. His middle name also has 6 letters. So that's all it took for him to be the Antichrist. And Muhammad, they would figure that out. He's the Antichrist. He's got the mark of the beast. He's 666. And the thing is as I had the big slide with the big red letters, anybody's name could be made up. We could make up a formula to make Mitchell Malore into the Antichrist, to make Mitchell Malore into the mark of the beast, the 666. So we have to be careful. I don't know why the Apostle John would write a letter to the 7 churches of Asia warning them that in 1900 years, in a nation that didn't exist when they were there, it was just a bunch of like wasteland almost, some guy named Mikhail Gorbachev is going to reign in a nation called the Soviet Union. I don't get that. I don't know why he would be the guy. And by the same token, I don't know why Ronald Reagan would either. Roger.
I don't think any of those names are. But while you were talking, it made me think of something. In the first century, when this letter was written, what would be the reason for putting it into code? Could John have been worried that he had to kind of go sideways toward the person's name, lest his time in prison be made worse while he was on Patmos, so he had to hint around it? I don't know why to make that figurative if everybody's going to know who it is anyway.
Okay, so we're going to talk about that a whole lot more when we get to chapter 17. But the fact of the matter is there's some truth in that. Now, I don't think John personally was trying to save his skin. But there are a lot of things in the New Testament that you would wonder why. Okay, if you look at the Old Testament, there are a number of prophets who say scathing things about the Jewish nation and died for it, for the sins that the Jewish nation had committed and the leaders had committed. Jeremiah was put in a pit, and you think, well, what's a pit? It's basically a well that's like a muddy pit, a cistern, and he was put down there, and they would lower pieces of food on there just enough to keep him alive because he said things against the king. You go to the New Testament, is God's kingdom of this world? God's kingdom is not of this world. So in the New Testament, Christ doesn't point to the rulers of the nations because he's not establishing a kingdom of this world. But are the nations, the leaders of our nations, are they good guys all the time? When Paul wrote to honor the king and do the right thing and be good citizens, Nero was the emperor. The New Testament does not say anything critical of a government. It says things critical about each and every one of us. So let's just say that John was talking about Nero, for instance, and said, the Roman Empire is the beast, Nero's the guy, and he's Satan incarnate. How would that go for Christians? Not good, that's right. It would not go well for them. Now, a lot of you are like, but Christians died. They spoke up for their beliefs. The church, and now I'm going to get political now. The church is not a political organization. So the church has always been focused on a war against Satan and a war in each and every one of us to do the right thing. Each and every one of us need to be followers of God. We are supposed to pray for our leaders so that they will also do what's right. So we're going to talk more about that when we get to chapter 17, because he doesn't come out and say Rome is Satan incarnate, but he's going to say a lot of things that are going to be like pretty obvious when we get there. Okay, so I hope that kind of answers the question, and maybe y'all are all reading ahead to chapter 17 and doing some Googling to figure out what I'm talking about in advance. Again, Christ's kingdom is not of this world. So Christ doesn't have beef with a nation because all of the nations of this world he considers as worldly nations, right? Then none in particular is any better than any other, right? Anyone who's not a Christian is not a Christian, right? Other questions or comments on this? Okay, so kind of getting to our summary, we don't know for sure who he's pointing to, but I believe it would have been obvious. Now, I got to be full disclosure here. A lot of people say, hey, look, Irenaeus didn't know who it was, and he was only maybe 100 years after the book was written. So that must mean that the Antichrist, the false prophet, was something in the future. It can't be talking about Rome, and it can't be talking about the emperor as being the false prophet. Well, Irenaeus did believe that the beast was Rome. He says that if you read his stuff. He thinks the beast is Rome. But he doesn't know who the false prophet was. But see, he's in Lyon, France. He's on the other side of the Alps. And he was well-traveled. He went to Rome and back, and he was martyred. He was murdered for the cause of Christ. But he wasn't in Asia in his adult life to maybe see whatever it was he was supposed to see to know. And so some would say, well, maybe it wasn't written down, but there were people who had the gifts from the Holy Spirit who knew what it was, who could interpret. I guess that's possible, but depending on when you think the book was written, people who had actually seen an apostle were kind of, they were all dying of old age or from being martyred, so maybe not. But you would think that if everybody knew, it would have been preserved in history. But then again, we talked about most of the folks in here didn't know what Kendrick Lamar was talking about, and that was just a couple of weeks ago. Okay. Now, I wanted to, I left this last part for overtime because if we had time to get to it, we were going to get to it, and if we didn't, well, then we just wouldn't. But a lot of people, you know, I've said this over and over. If I go tell you that the Bible means what it says and says what it means, I can't sell any books. The only way for me to go sell books and make money is to question the Bible, and then I'll have a bestseller. And you go look at the bestseller list and all these books, and they're not ones that say the Bible meant what it said. They're just not out there. Okay. So you're going to find that some people say that the mark of the beast isn't 666, it's 616. And so we've been looking for the wrong guy. No joke. Go read it. It's out there. Okay. So that's because there are a couple of fragments. You see that? I'm glad we're on the big screen there. You can see that fragment says 616. And that's what 666 looks like. So you can see that the difference between the little squiggly mark that means a 60, and the little squiggly mark that means a 10 are very, very small. So some people hold on to this little fragment and say, see, that's the real one. All the rest of them are wrong. This little fragment, that's the right one. Well, Irenaeus knew about this fragment as well, this version as well. He was aware that there had already been this transcription error before he was around. And some people, so how does this work? Okay. John writes the book, right? People make copies of it. People make copies of copies. And for the most part, they do a very good job. But from time to time, somebody will make a typo. And how do we know who was right? We line up 50 copies, and if 49 of them agree, we know one's got a typo. It's that simple. If a piece of the page is torn off and we don't know what it says, we go to the one where that piece of the page isn't torn off. We can figure it out. Well, Irenaeus knew this, and he's like, and if you read all this, what he's thinking is I think some guy made a typo, and I'm sure he did it on accident, and as long as it was on accident, I don't think he's going to suffer and go to hell for it. I think he just made just a typographical error. And this is about 100 years after. But he was already aware of this, and people knew about this, and they said, you know, there's a version, somebody made a copy, and that copy got sent to so-and-so, so they think the number's 616, but it's actually 666. And he's putting this in his book Against Heresies because he wants everybody to know the truth, that it's actually 666. So he wrote this, again, about 180 AD, and I'll send out these PDFs, and there's a link. And earlychristianwritings.com, all of this stuff, the stuff from Pliny the Younger, Irenaeus, Polycarp, all of their stuff is translated into English, and you can go read what they said hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This guy isn't a prophet. He's basically an elder in the church, but he was an elder in the church a whole lot closer to the events than maybe our elders are today. But again, he was in France. He was on the other side of the Alps. Yeah, Roger.
I just want to say this in defense of Irenaeus, because we get a very good principle from this. The only information we have, something 100 years older or older, is what we have written down. And if we can't find the exact thing written down, our speculation means nothing. The only facts we have are what's written. And so if this was all oral or verbal in the first century, we wouldn't hear about it. So trying to make a definite decision about what he said 100 years after is kind of erroneous. There's so much I don't know about what happened 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Unless I read it, I never will.
Yeah. So next week, we're going to jump right into chapter 14. So everybody read chapter 14 for next week, and we're going to pick up the pace. I wanted to camp out a little bit in chapter 13 because there's so many controversial things, but we're going to start picking up the pace again in chapter 14. Thank you for your kind attention. Class dismissed.